There are moments in life when someone walks away and the emptiness feels like a wound, a door slammed without warning. Yet Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, offers a gentler lens. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Not everyone who leaves is truly a loss. Sometimes their departure is the natural unfolding of our inner growth. People are mirrors, often reflecting the parts of us we are meant to recognize, heal, or outgrow. When their role in our personal narrative concludes, the universe, in its quiet wisdom, clears space for new insights and deeper connections. It is not abandonment, but rather a necessary shedding, much like trees releasing their leaves in autumn, not as a sign of death, but a preparation for renewal. In this sense, departures teach us that we are not defined by who stays, but by who we become in the absence of those who cannot walk further with us. Instead of mourning the space they leave behind, we can choose to tend to it with curiosity and compassion, knowing that such spaces often become the fertile ground where new understanding, relationships, and selfhood quietly take root. Dear everyone, before we continue the program, if you enjoy this topic, please comment number 1. If you'd like me to create more similar content, comment number 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any useful videos. Thank you, and wish you all meaningful moments. Have you ever lain awake at night, feeling the sting of someone's absence, wondering why they left? Or worse, why you weren't enough for them to stay? Maybe it was a friend who grew distant, a lover who turned into a stranger, or a family member who vanished when you needed them most. And in the quiet of that aching space, a painful question circles your mind. What did I do wrong? We've all been there, tangled in that invisible thread that ties our worth to someone else's presence. The end of a relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, often feels like a personal failure. We mourn not just the person, but the version of ourselves we were when they were around. The emptiness seems like proof that something is broken within us, something that repels love, connection, or loyalty. But what if I told you that this feeling, this ache, is not the full story? That the departure of others, rather than being an indictment of your value, might actually be part of a deeper psychological process. This is where the insight of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, becomes a lighthouse in the fog of abandonment. Jung believed that our lives are orchestrated by the unconscious, the hidden parts of ourselves that we often don't even realize are influencing us. He famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When people leave us, it's tempting to call it bad luck, betrayal, or even destiny. But what if, just what if, their leaving is the unconscious nudging us toward growth? What if the universe, through their departure, is presenting us with an invitation, an opportunity to confront our shadows, heal hidden wounds, and evolve into a fuller version of ourselves? Not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some are lessons wrapped in human form. Some are catalysts meant to awaken a part of us that we've neglected. And some, if we're honest, were never meant to stay because their chapter in our story has simply ended. In this video, we'll journey through the depths of Jung's philosophy to understand why certain people exit our lives and why that is not only natural, but necessary. We'll explore how the unconscious mind shapes our connections, how projections influence who we attract, and how every departure is a mirror reflecting back an unmet need within us. So if you've ever found yourself broken by someone's absence or haunted by the ghosts of connections past, stay with me. What you're about to discover might just change the way you see loss, healing, and your own unfolding destiny. Welcome to Galactic Wisdom, where we explore the cosmos within you. 1. The hidden architecture of our relationships. Jung and the unconscious. When we think about the people who come into our lives, friends, partners, even fleeting acquaintances, it's easy to believe that these meetings are random, that they just happen. But Carl Jung would tell us otherwise. He believed that there is a hidden architecture beneath every connection we form, a blueprint quietly drafted by our unconscious mind long before we even realize it. According to Jung, the unconscious isn't just a dark basement of repressed memories and shadowy impulses. It is a vibrant, living realm where forgotten parts of ourselves dwell. These parts, Unacknowledged fears, unmet needs, desires we dare not speak, create an internal landscape. And this inner world magnetizes certain people into our orbit while pushing others away. This is not fate in the sense of predestined tragedy, but fate as a psychological inevitability when we remain blind to our deeper selves. Have you ever noticed patterns in the types of people you attract? Maybe you keep finding yourself with partners who are emotionally unavailable, or friends who take more than they give, or colleagues who challenge your sense of worth. To Jung, these aren't accidents. They are reflections of the psychic material that remains unresolved within us. In his own words, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. We are often drawn to those who reflect back to us the very things we need to confront. If you carry abandonment wounds from childhood, you may find yourself magnetized to those who leave. If you harbor suppressed anger, you may attract volatile relationships. If self-worth is your silent struggle, you might be surrounded by those who diminish you, because deep down, you still believe that is what you deserve. This is the power of projection, one of Jung's most transformative concepts. Projection is when the unconscious contents of our mind, things we aren't ready to face in ourselves, are cast outward onto other people. Instead of seeing others as they truly are, we see them as mirrors of our inner world. It's as though we walk through life with a projector strapped to our backs, casting internal films onto everyone we meet. But here's the catch. The projection can't hold forever. Eventually, reality seeps through. The idealized lover becomes human, the perfect friend disappoints, the inspiring mentor shows their flaws, and when that happens, people often leave, or we push them away, or the connection collapses under the weight of unmet expectations. Jung saw this not as a failure, but as a necessary rupture. When the projection collapses, we are faced with a choice: retreat into blame, shame, and sorrow, or begin the journey inward to reclaim the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. When someone leaves your life, especially when it feels sudden or painful, it might just be the psyche's way of signaling that the projection has served its purpose. That person was not meant to complete you, fix you, or stay forever. They were a psychological messenger, a living symbol urging you to look within. It is here that Jung's concept of individuation becomes crucial. Individuation is the lifelong process of integrating the unconscious with the conscious mind, a quest to become whole. Every departure, every loss, is a fork in the road of individuation. Do you cling to the external figure who can no longer meet your needs, or do you turn inward and ask, what part of myself have I abandoned that I sought so desperately in them? Jung wrote, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But not every reaction is meant to last. Some encounters are brief, yet catalytic. They shake us, awaken dormant parts of us, or reveal hidden wounds. And when their work is done, consciously or unconsciously, they exit. It hurts, yes, but the pain is not purposeless. It is an invitation to transformation. Imagine your psyche as a great house with many rooms, some well lit and others shrouded in shadow. The people who enter your life often guide you into rooms you've neglected. A forgotten memory, an overlooked strength, a shadowy fear. When they leave, the room remains open. You can choose to explore it, understand it, and claim it as part of your whole self. Or you can shut the door, waiting for the next person to open it again. The question is, will you use their absence as a guidepost back to yourself? Understanding this doesn't make the sting of loss disappear overnight, but it does reframe it. Instead of seeing someone's departure as a diminishment of your worth, you can begin to see it as part of your personal evolution, a step in your journey towards psychological wholeness. So the next time you ask, why did they leave me? Consider rephrasing it. What was I meant to learn through their presence, and now through their absence? This is not easy work. It requires courage, patience, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truths within us. But it is this work that Jung called the most important task of life, to become who you truly are. Number 2, the power of projection, seeing ourselves in others. When Carl Jung introduced the concept of projection, he gave us one of the most powerful psychological keys to understanding not just others, but ourselves. Yet projection is also one of the most elusive forces in our lives, because when we project, we don't see our own reflection. We see a seemingly independent person standing before us. We remain blind to the fact that what we are reacting to in them is actually something originating from within us. So what exactly is projection? In Jungian psychology, projection occurs when we unconsciously attribute qualities, feelings, or desires, often ones we repress or deny in ourselves, onto other people. Imagine your mind as a lantern, but instead of shining light forward, it projects hidden patterns onto everyone you meet. You may project your yearning for safety onto a partner, turning them into your savior, or your desire for admiration onto a mentor, elevating them to a pedestal they never asked to stand on, or your unresolved anger onto a stranger, seeing them as hostile or disrespectful even when their actions are neutral. Jung warned that projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. In other words, we aren't engaging with reality as it is. We are engaging with our own inner world, cast upon the canvas of the people around us. And here lies the trap. While projection can make relationships feel magical, intense, or even faded, it also carries the seeds of disappointment. Because no one can perfectly embody the image we have projected onto them. Eventually, the illusion cracks. And when it does, the very person we once adored may start to irritate, confuse, or betray us. Not because they changed, but because our projection failed. Consider relationships that begin with phrases like, "You're everything I've ever wanted," or "I feel like I've known you forever." These declarations often signal projection at work. We aren't seeing the real person. We're seeing a long-lost fragment of ourselves reflected back. It feels euphoric because it connects us to something we've been missing. Yet the danger is that we start expecting that person to continue playing the role we unconsciously assigned to them. The moment they deviate from the script by being human, flawed, or simply different, the relationship begins to strain. This is why some relationships burn out as quickly as they ignited. The projection collapses, and what remains is the uncomfortable task of seeing the other person as they truly are. And perhaps more painfully, seeing the parts of ourselves that we had unconsciously disowned. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who has never acknowledged their need for emotional security. They were taught to be independent, self-sufficient, never needing anyone. When they meet someone nurturing and emotionally available, they might immediately latch onto them, projecting all their unacknowledged needs for care and affection. This dynamic can feel intoxicating at first, but over time, the projected partner might feel suffocated, burdened with the impossible task of being everything to the other person. When they eventually withdraw or leave, the abandoned individual is left not just grieving the person, but the part of themselves they refuse to own, their need for emotional connection. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of withdrawing projections. He didn't mean we should stop loving, admiring, or connecting with others. Rather, he suggested that we must gradually recognize when we are relating to a projection instead of the real person. This process is painful, yes, because it requires humility and self-confrontation, but it is also liberating. Once you reclaim those projected parts, you become more whole, more centered, and less dependent on others to carry the weight of your psychological baggage. Withdrawing projections also transforms the quality of our relationships. We stop asking others to complete us. We see them not as saviors or villains, but as fellow travelers, flawed, beautiful, growing just like us. This kind of connection is not built on illusion, but on authentic presence. So how do you recognize projection in your own life? One clue is emotional intensity. If your reaction to someone, positive or negative, feels disproportionately strong compared to the actual interaction, projection may be at play. Another sign is when you find yourself idealizing or demonizing someone without really knowing them, or when you use phrases like "you always" or "you never," painting them in fixed, unchanging terms that may actually reflect more about you than them. Jung taught that the more we integrate the contents of our unconscious, the less we project. This is why he saw therapy, introspection, and shadow work as essential tools for individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated self. But what does this have to do with people leaving us? Everything. Often, People leave not because they have betrayed us, but because the projection that glued the connection together has dissolved. The unconscious work is either done, or we are being called to complete it within ourselves. Their exit can feel brutal, like a mirror shattering. But that broken mirror is an invitation to see ourselves directly, without distortion. When we understand projection, we can reinterpret someone's departure not as an act of rejection, but as the natural consequence of a deeper psychological cycle completing itself. Their role as our unconscious mirror may have ended, and now the real work begins, the work of reclaiming, integrating, and growing. 3. The shadow self, embracing what we deny. If projection is the mind's way of casting its inner images onto the world, then the shadow self is where many of those images originate. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow as the hidden or repressed aspects of our personality, the traits, impulses, desires, and fears that we have disowned, denied, or pushed deep into the unconscious because they don't fit with the image we have of ourselves. Every person carries a shadow. It is the other side of the ego, the parts of us that we refuse to see because doing so might threaten our sense of identity. If you see yourself as kind, you might repress anger or aggression. If you pride yourself on independence, you might suppress your longing for care and vulnerability. If you view yourself as logical, you might ignore your emotional sensitivities. Jung famously said, "The shadow is everything about ourselves that we refuse to know." Yet the shadow does not remain silent. When ignored, it leaks into our relationships, our reactions, and most profoundly, our projections. It can make us see in others what we cannot admit in ourselves. For example, a person who suppresses their jealousy might become hypersensitive to jealousy in others, accusing friends or partners of envy without cause. Someone who denies their own manipulative tendencies might see manipulation everywhere they go. Conversely, positive qualities can also be shadowed. If you suppress your creativity, you might project it onto others, idolizing artists and visionaries, believing you could never create something of worth, even though that potential lies inside you. When we fail to confront our shadow, we become vulnerable to unconscious patterns in relationships. We seek out people who carry our shadow for us. We may be drawn to those who embody traits we secretly desire or deeply fear. That's why relationships can feel like a battleground, not just between two people, but between the known and unknown parts of ourselves. This is why some people leave, or why we push them away. When someone holds up a mirror to our shadow, the reflection can feel unbearable. We may label them toxic, difficult, or problematic, not realizing that the discomfort we feel is often a confrontation with ourselves. The very person we cannot stand might represent a part of us we have yet to embrace. On the other hand, sometimes the one who leaves is the one who sees through our facade, the masks we wear to hide our shadow. They might unconsciously sense that we are not fully integrated, and rather than participate in an inauthentic connection, they drift away. Their departure becomes an unspoken challenge. Will you now face what you've been hiding from yourself? Jung believed that shadow work, the process of recognizing, accepting, and integrating the shadow, is essential for individuation, the path to psychological wholeness. This is not about eliminating the shadow, but making it conscious so it no longer controls us from the dark. So how do we begin to engage with our shadow? 1. Observe your triggers. Triggers are a direct line to the shadow. When someone provokes an intense emotional reaction, anger, disgust, envy, ask yourself, what part of me is being reflected here? The shadow often reveals itself in moments of judgment, irritation, or even obsession. 2. Examine recurrent patterns. If you notice repetitive patterns in your relationships, such as always feeling abandoned, disrespected, or overlooked, it might be your shadow reenacting unresolved stories. Patterns are the psyche's way of replaying the same lesson until we finally learn it. 3. Embrace discomfort. Shadow work is not comfortable. It asks us to sit with qualities we've long rejected. This might involve admitting to jealousy, pride, selfishness, or vulnerability. Yet by acknowledging these traits, we diminish their unconscious power over us. 4. Practice self-compassion. Integrating the shadow is not about self-punishment. It's about embracing your full humanity. Jung believed that wholeness comes not from being good, but from being real, embracing both light and dark within us. Self-compassion softens the confrontation with the shadow, allowing for genuine growth. When we integrate our shadow, our projections begin to dissolve. We no longer need others to carry what we refuse to hold. We can see people as they are, rather than as distorted reflections of our own psyche. Relationships become clearer, healthier, and less burdened by unconscious expectations. And when people still leave, as they sometimes will, we can face their departure with greater understanding. Their absence no longer feels like a loss of self, but as a natural part of our ongoing evolution. We can thank them, silently, for the role they played in revealing our shadows and guiding us, however painfully, back to ourselves. To quote Jung, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Every person who leaves, every relationship that ends, is an opportunity to illuminate that darkness, to meet ourselves anew. 4. The archetypes that shape our bonds, who we seek and why they leave. If the shadow represents the hidden and repressed parts of ourselves, archetypes are the universal patterns that shape how we connect, love, and even lose others. Carl Jung introduced the concept of archetypes as innate, universal symbols and motifs that reside within the collective unconscious, a vast psychological inheritance shared by all humans across time and culture. Think of archetypes as timeless templates or blueprints. They influence how we perceive others, how we behave in relationships, and even how we experience loss and separation. Though the faces and names may change, the underlying patterns repeat across cultures, generations, and within our own lives. Understanding these archetypes helps us decode why certain people are irresistibly magnetic to us, why some relationships seem fated, and why some departures feel like soul-shattering losses. In truth, when someone leaves, they often take with them not just their physical presence, but the archetypal role they played in our psyche: the lover, the mother, the hero. Archetypes in connection. For instance, you may unconsciously seek out the lover archetype, someone who awakens passion, intimacy, and emotional depth within you. Their presence feels electrifying, transformative, even mystical. But the lover also carries the shadow of loss and transience. In mythology and literature, the lover often departs, dies, or betrays, not because love was false, but because love is inherently tied to change, impermanence, and renewal. Others might encounter the mother archetype, whether literally or symbolically, in the form of a nurturing, protective figure. We may cling to them as a source of comfort and unconditional support. But when this person leaves, we may feel abandoned, as though the very ground beneath us has vanished. Yet, this departure is often a nudge from the unconscious to self-parent, to cultivate within ourselves the care, stability, and love we projected onto another. Then there's the hero archetype, embodied by those who seem to lead, protect, or save us. We may look up to them, rely on them to guide us through chaos. But heroes are destined for trials, and often they leave to pursue their own journey. Their exit forces us to realize that no one else can complete our quest for us. We must become our own hero. These archetypal encounters feel profound because they tap into our collective unconscious. Yet they are not meant to last forever. Archetypes guide us, awaken parts of us, but they also move on, just as the figures in myths and dreams transform and vanish once their lesson is learned. The archetype of the departure. Interestingly, departure itself is archetypal. Across cultures, there are myths of the departing guide, the fading mentor, the vanishing lover. Think of Merlin leaving King Arthur, or the mysterious stranger who teaches a lesson and then disappears. These stories mirror the psychological truth that some people come into our lives not to stay, but to initiate us into a deeper level of awareness. Jung himself observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the reaction doesn't always lead to permanence. Sometimes the transformation occurs through separation, through the pain of someone leaving, because it forces us to integrate within ourselves the qualities we once saw only in them. When someone leaves, it is often because the archetypal role they served is complete. The psyche recognizes this even if the conscious mind resists it. We may cling, plead, or grieve, but on a deeper level, the unconscious is calling us forward, asking us to internalize what the other represented, to become whole on our own. Recognizing archetypes in our losses. To transform loss into wisdom, we can begin by asking, what archetype did this person represent for me? What part of myself did I see in them that I now feel I've lost? What qualities did they embody that I can now cultivate within? For example, if a nurturing partner leaves, perhaps life is urging you to develop self-compassion. If an inspiring friend departs, maybe it's time to rediscover your own creativity or leadership. If a protective figure disappears, you may be invited to build inner strength and resilience. Understanding these patterns allows us to grieve consciously. The pain remains real. This is not about bypassing emotions, but the narrative shifts. Instead of framing their departure as personal failure or punishment, we see it as part of a larger, archetypal dance, a psychological rite of passage. Growth beyond the archetypes. Jung emphasized that true individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness, requires moving beyond archetypal identifications. If we remain stuck in seeking the lover, the mother, the hero outside of ourselves, we perpetuate dependency. But when we integrate these archetypes internally, we embody their gifts. The lover's passion and vitality become ours to generate. The mother's nurturing and wisdom arise from within. The hero's courage and purpose ignite in our own actions. Thus, every person who leaves is a potential catalyst for this inner integration. They may have embodied a part of our psyche that we're now called to claim as our own. And so not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some are initiators. Some are archetypal guides disguised as ordinary people, playing their part in our story before moving on. 5. The gift of solitude, reclaiming yourself after loss. When someone leaves, what remains is not just silence, but solitude. And while solitude can feel like a punishment in the wake of loss, Carl Jung believed that it holds a sacred place in the journey of self-realization. In solitude, we are finally left alone with ourselves, stripped of projections, archetypes, and external distractions. And though it may feel like desolation, solitude is in fact the crucible of psychological alchemy, where transformation begins. Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." This is the true essence of solitude. It is not mere isolation, but a return to oneself, an opportunity to hear the voice that has been drowned out by the noise of relationships, obligations, and expectations. When someone departs from our lives, it often reveals how deeply we have abandoned ourselves in the pursuit of connection. We might realize that we outsourced our happiness, our validation, or our sense of purpose to the person who is now gone. Their presence may have acted like a bridge, sparing us from having to confront the parts of ourselves that felt incomplete, unloved, or unworthy. Now that the bridge is gone, we are faced with a landscape we must navigate alone. But this is not a barren wasteland. This is the inner world, waiting to be rediscovered. The alchemy of being alone. Solitude gives us the space to undertake what Jung called the night sea journey, the descent into the depths of the psyche, where the ego is humbled and the soul is awakened. This journey is often accompanied by sadness, longing, and confusion, but it is also the place where the seeds of individuation are planted. In solitude, we begin to ask deeper questions. Who am I without this person? What parts of myself did I neglect while they were here? What have I been afraid to face in my own company? These questions are not meant to torment us, but to liberate us. They point to the truth that, while connections are vital, no one else can complete the journey of self-discovery for us. Others can guide, inspire, and mirror us. But the integration of our soul's fragments is a task that only solitude can properly host, facing the inner figures. Jung also described how in solitude, we encounter the inner figures, the anima and animus, the shadow, the wise old man or woman, the inner child. These figures reside within the unconscious and often project themselves onto the people we meet in life. But when external figures leave, these inner characters begin to surface in dreams, fantasies, or creative expression. For example, if a nurturing partner leaves, the inner anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche, or the inner mother archetype might emerge in dreams, calling the individual to develop self-soothing capacities. If an inspiring figure departs, the inner wise old man or sage archetype might appear, signaling that it is time to cultivate personal wisdom rather than seek it from others. Solitude, then, is not emptiness. It is a reunion with the multitude of selves that live within us, the creative power of solitude. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, and philosophers have testified to the power of solitude. Jung himself often retreated to his tower in Bollingen, a home he built by hand beside a lake, where he spent time alone to connect with his unconscious, dream deeply, and engage in creative expression. He painted, carved, wrote, not for the world, but to understand himself. This is the gift that solitude offers each of us, the space to create not just art or work, but a renewed version of ourselves. Through journaling, painting, meditating, or simply walking in nature, solitude becomes a canvas on which the psyche can express its unspoken truths. It is here that we stop viewing the one who left as a thief who stole our peace. Instead, we begin to see them as a silent benefactor, whose absence became the opening for our own soul's emergence, from solitude to wholeness. But solitude is not meant to be a permanent retreat from the world. Rather, it is a necessary season of self-reclamation, preparing us to re-enter relationships from a place of wholeness rather than deficiency. When we emerge from solitude, having integrated our shadow, reclaimed our projections, and nurtured our inner figures, we are no longer driven by unconscious needs to find someone to complete us. We can connect from a space of authenticity, offering ourselves fully without demanding that others fill our voids. As Jung put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this privilege is often granted through the gateway of solitude, often after a painful goodbye, embracing the empty space. So if you are sitting now in that empty space, the space someone else once filled, know that it is not a void, but a sanctuary. It is the psychic garden where the seeds of your next evolution are being planted. Tend to it gently. Meet yourself fully in this space. Allow the grief to coexist with curiosity, for in this stillness, you will begin to hear a new voice, your own. 6. Transforming grief into growth. The alchemy of mourning. When someone leaves, they don't just take their presence, they leave behind an echo, a haunting sense of incompletion. In that echo lives grief, and grief, when not understood, can feel like an endless abyss. But Carl Jung taught us that grief is not simply an emotional response, it is an invitation to psychological alchemy, where sorrow is not the end, but the beginning of transformation. We often think of grief as a singular emotion, sadness. But in truth, grief is a constellation of feelings. Sadness, anger, confusion, fear, even relief. It is the psyche's attempt to reorganize itself after a rupture. When someone we love departs, whether through death, distance, or separation, our inner world loses a part of its structure. The ego, accustomed to the other's presence, now finds itself disoriented. Jung believed that such disorientation is not a pathology. It is a necessary stage in the process of individuation. In other words, the psyche must grieve to grow. This is why attempting to bypass grief by distraction, suppression, or premature moving on often leads to stagnation, depression, or recurring patterns in relationships. The unconscious demands that we feel, not just superficially, but deeply, so that the loss can carve out new space within us for insight and renewal. Grief as a rite of passage. In many ancient cultures, grief was not a private burden, but a communal and ritualistic process. Mourning was sacred, a threshold between what was and what could be. Jung, deeply influenced by mythology and ritual, would argue that grief is akin to a personal rite of passage. The old self, the self that existed in connection with the departed, must die symbolically so that a new self can be born. In this way, grief becomes a psychic death and rebirth. The feelings that arise, however painful, are the flames in which the old identity burns away, making room for transformation. Jung called this process the nigredo, the blackening stage of alchemy, where the material must be reduced to its rawest form before it can be purified and reformed. So when you are grieving, it may help to remember, you are not broken. You are in the blackening. You are in the sacred dark. Confronting the self in grief. Grief also brings us face to face with ourselves. The absence of the other leaves behind not just emptiness, but a mirror. In that mirror, we see the parts of ourselves that we neglected while they were present. Perhaps we see how much of our identity was entangled with theirs. Or we recognize the dreams we postponed, the self-sufficiency we avoided, the creativity we stifled. These revelations can be painful, but they are also the gold within the sorrow. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Grief is a painful but necessary awakening. It exposes the places where we outsourced meaning to others, urging us to retrieve that meaning from within." Practices for alchemizing grief. How then do we consciously transform grief into growth? Jungian psychology offers several pathways. Active imagination. This is a technique Jung developed to engage with the unconscious directly. In moments of grief, you can close your eyes, envision the departed person, and begin a dialogue with them in your imagination. What would they say? What unspoken feelings remain? This practice allows the psyche to complete unfinished emotional business, even in the absence of the person. Dream work. Dreams during grief often become more vivid or symbolic. Keeping a dream journal can reveal insights about what the unconscious is processing. A recurring figure, symbol, or landscape might represent feelings that need attention. Creative expression. Art, writing, music. These are not just distractions from grief, but tools for its transmutation. When you externalize your sorrow creatively, you give it form, shape, and meaning, allowing the psyche to process the inexpressible. Ritual. Whether it's lighting a candle, creating an altar, or conducting a personal ceremony, rituals help anchor grief in time and space. They signal to the unconscious that a transition is underway, that mourning is part of the sacred cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The wisdom gained from grief. Over time, grief softens. It doesn't vanish, but it changes. What once was a sharp, unbearable pain may evolve into a gentle melancholy, a quiet gratitude for what was shared. And beyond the pain, a new self emerges, more self-aware, more integrated, more alive. This is the gift of grief that Jung alluded to in his work. It is not a detour from life, but a deepening of it. The person who leaves, whether by choice, fate, or death, leaves behind a psychic imprint that continues to shape who we become. If we are willing to stay with the sorrow, to hold space for it, to mine it for understanding, then we emerge not diminished, but expanded. As Jung poignantly stated, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Grief is that wound, painful, raw, and yet if honored, it becomes the very place through which new wisdom, strength, and clarity flow. 7. Letting go without losing, integrating the memory of those who leave. Letting go. It sounds so final, doesn't it? As though to let go of someone means to erase them from our hearts, our thoughts, even our very identity. But Carl Jung's perspective invites a more nuanced, more compassionate understanding. Letting go is not about forgetting or detaching. It is about integration. When someone leaves our life, whether by choice, death, or drifting apart, their psychological imprint doesn't vanish. They remain within us, not as ghosts to haunt us, but as psychic figures whose meaning we can carry forward. The challenge is not to hold on in a way that paralyzes us, but to integrate their significance so that their influence helps us grow, rather than keeping us stuck in longing or regret. The difference between clinging and integrating. Clinging is when we refuse to accept the reality of their absence. We keep replaying old conversations, checking their social media, revisiting shared memories like they're sacred relics. The pain stays fresh because on some level, we are refusing to let the connection evolve. Integration, on the other hand, is a process of internalization. It asks us, what did this person awaken in me? What did I admire, love, or even resent about them? How can I honor their influence by cultivating those qualities within myself? For example, if the person who left inspired your creativity, perhaps integrating their memory means nurturing your own creative pursuits. If they embodied kindness or strength, then embodying those traits honors their impact on your life. In this way, they do not disappear. They live within you, transformed. Jung's process of individuation encourages us to do precisely this, to take the figures from our external world, the friends, lovers, teachers, even enemies, and recognize them as inner archetypal figures. By doing so, we no longer remain dependent on their physical presence to access what they represented to us. The inner dialogue. One of the powerful methods Jung advocated for was active imagination, where we engage in a conscious dialogue with these internalized figures. If someone has left your life but still occupies your thoughts, you can close your eyes, picture them vividly, and ask, what message do you have for me now? What lesson was I meant to learn through knowing you? How can I move forward without abandoning what you meant to me? You might be surprised by the insights that arise from this practice. Often, the mind provides answers that the conscious self was unable or unwilling to acknowledge. These inner dialogues help transform the memory of the person from a static relic of the past into a dynamic guidepost for personal growth. Creating symbols of memory. In many cultures, remembrance is anchored in symbolism: a locket, a song, a place, a ritual. Creating a symbol of memory can aid in the process of integration. Perhaps it's writing a letter you never send, dedicating a creative project to them, or even planting a tree in their honor. These acts don't tether you to the past. They help channel the emotional energy into something meaningful, ensuring that the connection continues to evolve rather than decay. Honoring without captivity. To let go without losing means to honor what the person represented while freeing yourself from the emotional captivity of their departure. It is acknowledging they mattered, their impact shaped you, and yet you are not incomplete without them. Jung's philosophy teaches us that every external relationship mirrors an internal relationship with ourselves. If their departure leaves a wound, that wound reveals where we need to reconnect inwardly. Instead of waiting for someone else to fill that gap, we become our own source of nourishment and healing. The continuing inner journey. There is a subtle but profound truth in Jung's words. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. Every person who enters or leaves our life reveals another layer of this unknown self. The one who left simply finished playing their part in that revelation. You don't have to sever your emotional ties completely to move on. Instead, you evolve the connection, integrating what was valuable, discarding what was harmful, and allowing your inner world to be enriched by the encounter. When you live this way, loss no longer feels like a void. It becomes a space transformed by wisdom, by remembrance, and by a quiet inner strength that no departure can ever take away. A gentle reflection. As we near the end of this reflection, ask yourself, who still lives within me as an unintegrated figure? What do they represent that I need to claim as my own? How can I honor their role in my life while walking forward with peace? In doing so, you turn every departure into a gift of becoming, where no one who leaves is ever truly a loss, because their essence, their lesson, their reflection lives on within you. 8. Meeting others anew. How Jung teaches us to relate after loss. When we've done the deep inner work, when we've faced the shadow, withdrawn our projections, embraced solitude, and transformed our grief, something profound changes within us. We become different people. And so naturally, the way we meet others anew also changes. Carl Jung's teachings offer us a renewed lens for connection, one shaped not by unconscious need or fear of loss, but by presence, awareness, and wholeness. We begin to see that every relationship is a mirror, but now we're more conscious of what's being reflected. We no longer rush to idealize or vilify others. We pause, we observe, we wonder, what part of me is showing up here? This makes our connections richer, more honest, and paradoxically more stable, because they are not built on illusion, relating without projection. Before, we may have approached relationships seeking completion. The other person was a missing puzzle piece, someone to soothe our insecurities or fulfill a role we unconsciously assigned. But having withdrawn those projections, we can now relate from a place of inner sufficiency. We don't need the other to heal us. We want to know them as they are. This shift transforms the very fabric of connection. We move from attachment to appreciation, from grasping to gratitude. We can love deeply while recognizing that no one is ours to possess. Every bond is a meeting of two evolving souls, each walking their own path, each free to stay or go, and yet beautifully intertwined for however long life allows. The dance of conscious relationships. Jung's insights reveal that conscious relationships are like a dance between two individuating selves. Each person brings their wholeness, their wounds, their wisdom, and their mystery. In this dance, we are companions, not saviors, not crutches, not ideals projected on a screen. We understand that people will inevitably change, as will we. We cannot prevent endings, but we can remain open to learning. Love is not static. It is an evolving force that sometimes carries people together and sometimes apart. When we embrace this, we stop fearing loss in the same way. Because we know now, Loss is not the opposite of connection, it is part of the same sacred cycle. The return of the self. In meeting others anew, we also meet ourselves differently. We have become more whole, more capable of standing in our own light. The parts of us we once denied, the shadows, the wounds, the unmet needs, have been seen, embraced, and integrated. Jung reminds us that the goal is not perfection, but wholeness, and wholeness means carrying both joy and sorrow, light and dark, love and loss within us, and still walking forward, eyes open, heart intact. Living without fear of who might leave. Imagine living without the constant fear of abandonment, betrayal, or rejection. This isn't a fantasy. It's a psychological state made possible through the journey we've traveled together in this exploration. When you no longer see someone's presence as the sole source of your worth, their absence loses the power to define your emptiness. You realize that every person who comes into your life is a teacher, whether they stay or go. And with this mindset, every goodbye becomes less of a rupture and more of a rite of passage. A final reflection. So as we close this journey together, I invite you to reflect. Who in your life has left, but whose lessons remain? What part of yourself did their presence awaken? How might you meet the next person, not with the hunger for completion, but with the peace of self-awareness? Jung wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Every person is a disguise, a reflection, a gift. Some stay, some go, but none of them are wasted encounters. When you embody this wisdom, you'll find that no departure ever truly diminishes you, because you carry forward not just the memory, but the meaning. This is the essence of Jungian insight and the heart of galactic wisdom, to remind you that the cosmos within you is vast, whole, and ever-evolving. Every meeting, every loss is a star being born or fading, but the galaxy of your soul remains ever luminous. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until our next exploration, stay curious, stay conscious, and remember, not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some are simply guides who have done their part. And if this journey resonated with you, if it stirred a reflection on those who've come and gone in your life, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us, who taught you the most by leaving? What wisdom did their absence reveal? Let's continue this conversation together as fellow travelers decoding the universe within. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the psyche, philosophy, and the unseen forces that shape our lives. Your support helps us grow this cosmic community of seekers and thinkers. Thank you for being here, for expanding your inner galaxy with us. Until next time, stay awake, stay wondering, and remember, galactic wisdom is already within you.